My name is Isla Marin, and for most of my life, I have been a student of quiet things. The way moss carpets the north side of an oak tree, the precise scent of petrichor after a summer shower, the silent language of a garden waking in the spring. As a landscape architect, my work is to create harmony in spaces, to coax life from silent earth. My own life, however, has often felt like a space I was tasked with tending for others, a garden where I was the groundskeeper, never the one for whom the roses bloomed. This feeling was never more acute than at my sister's wedding. The day was a masterpiece of curated perfection, held at the conservatory, a glass and steel cathedral of a venue downtown where sunlight poured through the vaulted ceilings onto tables laden with peonies and heirloom roses. My sister, Lyra, was the centerpiece of it all, a vision in bespoke lace, her laughter echoing through the hall like chimes. She was the sun around which our family had always orbited. I was a quieter satellite, useful for my steady gravity, but rarely noticed for my own light. I had co-signed the loan for her first apartment, paid the deposit on this very venue when their savings fell short, and edited the wedding invitations until the calligraphy was flawless. These were my silent contributions, the fertile soil from which her happiness grew. And as always, when the blossoms opened, I was forgotten in the roots. I wore a simple dress the color of a stormy sea, a shade that could blend into the background. I nursed a glass of sparkling water, watching the celebration unfold from a safe distance. Across the room, I saw my parents watching me. My mother's smile was a thin, polished veneer. My father offered a curt nod, the kind a supervisor gives an employee who has completed a task. It was a familiar, bloodless exchange. A short while later, my mother drifted toward me, her silk dress shimmering under the soft lights. "Isla, darling," she began, her voice a warm, honeyed confection. She placed a hand on my arm, her touch light but insistent. "Could we have a little chat?" "Just us." I knew this tone. It was the prelude to a request, the gentle music before the curtain rose on the real performance. I followed her to a secluded alcove overlooking the city's skyline, the lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. My father joined us, his hands tucked in his pockets, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the glass. "What a perfect day," my mother sighed, her eyes shining with a manufactured sentimentality. "Lyra has found such a wonderful man. This is a new beginning for all of us, a chance to really come together as a family." I waited. The silence hung between us, heavy with unspoken expectation. "We were thinking," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "about your condo. It's such a beautiful space, and you're so often away for work. It's a lot for one person." She paused, letting the implication settle. Wouldn't it be a magnificent wedding gift? For Lyra and Liam to start their married life there. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I had felt this coming for weeks, in little hints and casual remarks, but hearing it spoken aloud, so casually, as if it were the most natural request in the world, was breathtaking. "My condo?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Of course, darling." From one sister to another. A gesture of love. She smiled, a perfect, practiced curve of her lips. I looked at my father. He was still studying the skyline, his face a mask of deliberate neutrality. He would not save me. He never did. "You planned this," I said, the words quiet but sharp. "You brought me out here to ask me to give away my home." My mother's smile tightened. "Isla, don't be so dramatic. It's not about you being alone. It's about family. It's about supporting your sister." "No," I said, the word a small, solid stone in the churning river of her expectations. I lifted my chin, meeting her gaze directly. "The answer is no. That home is mine." Her composure shattered. The honeyed warmth in her eyes turned to ice. "You selfish, ungrateful girl," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. And then her hand moved, a blur of motion in the soft light. The slap wasn't loud, but it was sharp, a stinging crack that echoed in the sudden silence of the alcove. My head snapped to the side. The pain was a hot, blooming flower on my cheek, but it was the look in her eyes that truly burned. It was a look of cold, hard fury, the look of a person whose will had been defied. She leaned in, her voice a venomous whisper. "This is for the family." In that moment, something inside me, something that had been bent for years under the weight of their expectations, did not break. It straightened. A strange, quiet calm washed over me. I turned my head back slowly and looked at her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. A small, sad smile touched my lips, a smile that was not for them, but for me. It was the smile of a person who had just read the final, predictable sentence of a very long, very painful book. I saw Lyra watching from a distance, her expression unreadable before she turned away. Liam, her new husband, simply looked down at his shoes. No one moved. No one spoke. My father finally cleared his throat. "This isn't about you, Isla." "Of course not," I replied, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I straightened my dress, picked up my small clutch from the windowsill, and walked away. I moved through the shimmering hall, my steps measured and even, past the whispering guests and the clinking glasses. I didn't look back. Outside, the valet brought my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, the engine off, the silence of the leather-scented interior a balm to my raw nerves. My cheek throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a small, velvet-covered book. It was my grandmother's garden journal, filled with her elegant, sloping script and pressed flowers from decades past. She had given it to me the year I'd bought my condo. "Never let them make you feel small in a space you built yourself," she had told me, her eyes clear and knowing. "Your peace is not a currency they can spend." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my sofa, the city lights a soft blur through my window, and held her journal in my lap. I didn't cry. Instead, I went to my study and unlocked the bottom drawer of my filing cabinet, a place where I kept things that mattered. There was the deed to my condo, my name clear and unequivocal. And beside it, in a sealed manila envelope, was the second, revised copy of my grandmother's will, the one she had filed privately with her lawyer, the one my family knew nothing about. I held the journal to my chest, its worn velvet soft against my skin, and felt the first stirrings not of a battle to be fought, but of a peace to be claimed. The next morning, the city woke in a haze of gray light, the kind that softens sharp edges and muffles sound. My cheek bore a faint, rose-colored mark, a tangible reminder of the line that had been crossed. I didn't cover it with makeup. I looked at it in the mirror, not as a wound, but as a landmark, the point on the map where my journey had changed direction. I made coffee, the ritual of grinding the beans and the rich aroma filling my kitchen a familiar comfort. Leaning against the counter, I looked out over the small terrace garden I had cultivated, a miniature wilderness of herbs, climbing jasmine, and Japanese maples. This was my sanctuary, the place I had poured my heart into, and the thought that they saw it as nothing more than a bargaining chip, a prize to be gifted away, settled in my bones with a cold finality. I walked to my study and opened the locked drawer again. Beneath a stack of old blueprints, I found the thick manila envelope. My hands were steady as I slid out the contents. My grandmother's last letter to me was clipped to the top of the will, her handwriting a beautiful, spidery script. "My dearest Isla," it began. "I know you have never been one to ask for things. You build, you nurture, you give. That is your nature. It is also why you must learn to protect what is yours. This condo is your haven. I have made sure it is legally, irrevocably yours. They will try to tell you that love means yielding. But true love, Isla, does not demand you erase yourself. It makes space for you to grow. The enclosed documents are your shield. Use them not to fight, but to stand your ground." Beneath the letter was the notarized will, filed 3 months before her passing, leaving the condo and a separate savings account solely to me. I had never needed to use it. I had hoped, naively, that time and my own quiet efforts would eventually earn their respect. The slap had been a brutal, clarifying answer to that hope. I spent the morning in quiet, methodical preparation. I made copies of the deed, the will, and the property tax receipts I had paid for the last 5 years. I organized them into a neat portfolio, the simple act of creating order a quiet rebellion against the chaos they had tried to inflict. Then, I picked up my phone and called Evelyn Reed, my grandmother's longtime attorney, a woman whose calm demeanor masked a will of iron. "Evelyn, it's Isla Marin." Her voice was as crisp and clear as I remembered. "Isla, I was wondering when you might call." "I'd like to come in," I said. "It's time to review the documents." "Of course," she replied, without a hint of surprise. "I have the original files here. Shall we say Tuesday morning?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of normalcy. I went in my office, reviewed plans for a new public park, and spoke with clients. But beneath the surface of my professional calm, a new resolve was taking root. I was no longer waiting for them to see me. I was ensuring they had no choice but to acknowledge my boundaries. Around noon, while sketching a design for a stone pathway, a memory surfaced, unbidden. Lyra, a few years younger, crying on my sofa after a bitter argument with our parents. I had made her tea and listened for hours. "You're the only one who ever just listens," she had said, her voice thick with tears. "You're my rock, Isla." The memory, once a source of quiet pride, now felt like a stone in my shoe. I had been her rock, a foundation she could stand on to reach for what she wanted. And when I had finally refused to be quarried for more stone, I had become an obstacle. That evening, I returned home to find a small, beautifully wrapped box by my door. There was no card. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a silver locket. It was the something new gift for the bride, the one I had left on the gift table before I walked out of the wedding. Lyra must have had it sent over. It wasn't an apology. It was a reminder, a silent, glittering symbol of the role I was supposed to play, the giver, the provider, the one who asks for nothing in return. I placed the box on my entryway table, unopened. I would return it. My gifts, from now on, would be for myself. The first was the gift of clarity. The second would be the gift of peace, no matter the cost. The illusion of peace shattered on Monday afternoon. I was in a meeting, discussing the irrigation system for a rooftop garden, when my phone vibrated with a call from the management office of my building. "Ms. Marin? This is Sarah from the front desk. I'm just calling to confirm the access update for your unit." My pen stopped moving. "I'm sorry, what access update?" "We received a request this morning to add a Ms. Lyra Evans to your resident profile and issue her a new key fob. The email said you were traveling and had authorized her to move in while you were away." A cold dread, sharp and familiar, coiled in my stomach. "I did not authorize that," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Lyra is not moving in. Please cancel that request immediately." "Oh!" "Of course, Ms. Marin." "I'm so sorry for the confusion." The request looked quite official. "I'm sure it did," I murmured, and hung up. I stared at the architectural drawings in front of me, but all I could see was Lyra's face at the wedding, that fleeting look of calculation before she had turned away. They weren't just asking anymore. They were acting, moving forward with the quiet certainty of people who have never been told no. When I got home that evening, the setting sun was casting long, distorted shadows across my living room. I went straight to the security panel by the door and checked the access logs. There it was, an attempted entry at 2:15 p.m. using a duplicate key fob. The entry had been denied because I hadn't yet activated it. A memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharp and clear. 2 years ago, Lyra had stayed with me for a week when her apartment had a plumbing issue. "I made a copy of your fob, just in case of an emergency," she'd said with a breezy laugh. "You know, so I don't have to bother you." I had forgotten all about it. She, clearly, had not. I walked through my condo, room by room. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt tainted, the sanctity of my home violated. Then I noticed it. On the small table by the door where I kept my keys and mail, The small decorative bowl was slightly askew. The spare key to my mailbox was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. The envelope with my grandmother's will was no longer in the drawer. I had moved it to my secure postbox at the local shipping center that morning, a sudden, prescient impulse. But they wouldn't have known that. They had been looking for it. The betrayal was no longer a dull ache. It was a sharp, piercing pain. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a calculated campaign. I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Lyra. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would understand. My cousin, Maya. She was a quiet soul, an artist who had always lived on the periphery of the family's drama. Isla? Is everything okay? She answered, her voice soft with concern. I need to ask you something, Maya. Did you know about this? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I heard them talking at the rehearsal dinner, she finally admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Your mom and Lyra. They said you'd come around. That you always do. Thank you for telling me, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. After I hung up, I sat at my dining table and methodically documented everything. I took a screenshot of the building's access log. I took a photo of the empty space where the mailbox key had been. I drafted a formal email to Evelyn Reed, attaching the images and detailing the attempted entry and the fraudulent access request. The subject line was simple, urgent update. Then I made a cup of chamomile tea, carried it out to my terrace, and sat among my plants as the sky deepened from lavender to indigo. They thought I was emotional, that I would break, that I would eventually fold under the pressure. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness. They were about to learn the difference. While they were busy trying to pick the lock, I was changing the door. The next morning, I met with the head of my building's security, a stern, no-nonsense man named Mr. Henderson. I laid out the situation calmly and provided him with the documentation. Effective immediately, I stated, no one is to be granted access to my unit without my physical presence. I want all previous guest fobs deactivated and the lock on my door rekeyed. He looked at the paperwork, then at me, his expression unreadable. This level of security is unusual for a family matter, Ms. Marin. The circumstances are unusual, I replied. By noon, my home was a fortress. The lock was new, the access codes changed, and a camera was installed overlooking my front door, its feed synced directly to my phone. It felt extreme, but as my grandmother used to say, you don't mend a fence after the fox has been in the henhouse. That afternoon, I was in Evelyn Reed's office. The space was calm and orderly, lined with leather-bound books that smelled of old paper and wisdom. She reviewed the new evidence without comment, her expression thoughtful. They are moving faster than I anticipated, she said, her fingertips steepled. This attempt to gain access is a clear escalation. We need to send a formal notice. She drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to Lyra, citing the fraudulent access request and the attempted entry. It was concise, professional, and utterly uncompromising. This should give them pause, Evelyn said, sliding it into an envelope. It informs them that you are not only aware of their actions, but are also prepared to pursue legal remedies. I felt a sliver of relief, but it was short-lived. As I was leaving her office, my phone buzzed. It was my father. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text appeared. Isla, your mother is very upset. This has gone too far. Call me. I didn't reply. Instead, I drove to a small botanical garden on the outskirts of the city, a place my grandmother and I used to visit. I walked the winding paths, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming roses. I found a secluded bench by a koi pond and sat, watching the vibrant fish swim in lazy circles. The anger and the betrayal were still there, a hot knot in my chest. But for the first time, I allowed myself to feel the grief beneath it. The grief for the family I wished I had, the mother whose love wasn't conditional, the sister who could have been my friend. I reached into my bag for my grandmother's journal, its velvet cover worn smooth from her touch. I pressed it to my cheek, and for the first time since the wedding, I cried. Not for the slap, or the condo, or the lies. I cried for the little girl who had spent a lifetime tending a garden for people who would never appreciate its beauty, who only saw it as land to be claimed. The tears were a quiet, cleansing rain. When they subsided, a profound calm settled over me. The path forward was clear. I was no longer fighting for their approval. I was fighting for my own peace. And that was a battle I had no intention of losing. The cease and desist letter had the opposite of its intended effect. It was like throwing a stone into a hornet's nest. 2 days later, a courier delivered a thick, imposing envelope to my office. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, and it was addressed from my uncle, my mother's brother, Theo, a man who called himself a real estate visionary but was, in reality, a glorified house flipper with a shark smile. Inside was a formal legal notice accusing me of unlawful possession of a family asset and demanding I vacate the property within 10 business days. Attached was a document that made my blood run cold, a photocopy of a codicil to my grandmother's will, supposedly signed 2 months before she died, gifting the condo to Lyra upon her marriage. My grandmother's signature was at the bottom, a near-perfect forgery. I sank into my chair, the heavy, cream-colored paper trembling in my hand. They had fabricated a legal document. The audacity of it was staggering. But as the initial shock wore off, it was replaced by a cold, sharp anger. This wasn't just about a condo anymore. This was about erasing my grandmother's true wishes, about rewriting history to suit their narrative. I immediately forwarded a scan of the letter to Evelyn. Her reply was swift. "They are desperate, Isla. And sloppy. This document was never filed with the probate court. It's a bluff. A very serious, very illegal bluff." That afternoon, we drafted our response. It was simple and direct. We included a certified copy of the original, notarized deed transfer, which predated their forged codicil by a full year and had been legally filed with the city. We also included a sworn affidavit from the notary who had witnessed my grandmother's signature. Before Evelyn sealed the envelope, I took a small sticky note and wrote 2 words on it in clear, block letters. "Nice try." I placed it directly over the forged signature on their document. We sent it via courier directly to Uncle Theo's office. The following week was a war of attrition fought through emails and HOA complaints. Lyra, thwarted in her direct attempts, began a campaign of harassment. I received a notice from the building management about unauthorized and aesthetically displeasing alterations to my terrace garden. Another followed about excessive noise levels at hours when I was demonstrably at work. It culminated in a formal request for an HOA board meeting to discuss my ongoing violations. Lyra and my mother were there, their faces masks of concerned citizenship. They spoke of community standards and property values, their voices dripping with false sincerity. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. "I won't take up much of your time," I began, my voice calm and even. "I believe in facts." One by one, I presented my evidence. A time-stamped video from my security camera showing Liam, Lyra's husband, trying to jimmy the lock on my terrace gate late one night. GPS data from my phone and building entry logs that proved I wasn't home during the times of the noise complaints. I displayed a side-by-side comparison of the HOA bylaws and my terrace garden plans, which had been pre-approved by the board 2 years prior. Finally, I put up a slide with a single, high-resolution image, the forged codicil they had sent me, with my "nice try" sticky note still attached. A thick, uncomfortable silence filled the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. My mother's face was pale with fury. Lyra stared at the screen, her composure finally cracking. The HOA president cleared his throat. "In light of this information, all complaints against Ms. Marin are dismissed. This matter is closed." Lyra stood up so abruptly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is a family issue," she snapped, her voice shrill. "You have no right. You made it a community issue, I said quietly, meeting her furious gaze. I'm simply finishing the conversation you started. She stormed out of the room, my mother trailing in her wake. I packed up my laptop, my hands steady. Several of my neighbors, people who had previously looked at me with suspicion, now met my eyes with a newfound respect. One of them, an older woman from the floor below, touched my arm as I left. Good for you, dear, she said softly. Some people need to be shown the truth in black and white. Walking home under the streetlights, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt weary, but also strangely light. I had not stooped to their level. I had not yelled or accused. I had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had been undeniable. The truth, I was learning, had a quiet power all its own. The day after the HOA meeting, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was cryptic, something you need to hear. It was from my cousin, Maya. Attached was a single audio file. My heart pounded as I clicked play. The recording was from the night of the rehearsal dinner. I could hear the clinking of glasses and background chatter. Then, my mother's voice, low and conspiratorial. She'll fold. She always does. Just a little pressure, a little guilt about ruining Lyra's big day, and she'll sign the condo over. Then Lyra's voice, sharp and confident. She's so desperate for family approval. We'll make her feel like she's the one being selfish. It works every time. My aunt's laughter followed. She's too soft to fight back. She never has. I listened to the recording 3 times, the words weaving a tight, cold net around my heart. It was one thing to suspect their motives, another to hear them articulated so coldly, so casually. The systematic dismantling of my character, the clinical assessment of my emotional weaknesses, it was all there. I felt a profound, hollow sadness. I had spent my life trying to earn the love of people who saw my love as a lever to be pulled. That weekend, my aunt was hosting a post-wedding family brunch. I was not expected to attend. I went anyway. I arrived late, dressed in a simple cream-colored sweater and gray trousers. I walked into a room buzzing with cheerful conversation. My aunt greeted me with a look of stunned surprise. My mother rushed over, her face a mask of anxious welcome. Isla, we're so glad you came. We need to put all this ugliness behind us. I didn't respond. I walked to the head of the long dining table, where my father and Uncle Theo were seated, and placed my phone on the polished wood. I waited until there was a lull in the conversation, and then I pressed play. The recording filled the silent room, their own voices, clear and damning. When it ended, no one moved. Forks were suspended midair. My uncle stared at his plate, his face ashen. My father wouldn't look at me. My aunt looked as if she might be sick. Several cousins exchanged horrified glances. One of them, a man who had once told me I needed to be more supportive of Lyra, slowly pushed his chair back. Is this true? He asked, his voice low with disbelief, looking directly at my mother. You planned this? My mother stammered, It was just talk. A misunderstanding. You know how stressful weddings are. No, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. I don't think it was a misunderstanding. I picked up my phone. I think it was perfectly clear. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of their lies scattered among the brunch plates and champagne flutes. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The truth was finally sitting at the head of their table, and it was a guest they could not dismiss. The silence that followed the brunch was profound. No angry calls, no pleading texts. It was as if a storm had finally passed, leaving behind a strange, unsettling quiet. A few days later, there was a knock on my door. It was Liam, Lyra's new husband. He looked tired, his usual polished demeanor gone, replaced by a deep-set weariness. He was holding a thin file folder. Isla, he said, his voice strained. Can I come in? I stepped aside, and he walked into my living room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time. I didn't know the extent of it, he began, sitting on the edge of the sofa. I believed what they told me. That you were difficult, that the condo was always meant for Lyra, that it was a family understanding. He opened the folder and slid a document across the coffee table. It was a copy of his and Lyra's prenuptial agreement. He pointed to a highlighted clause. Future marital assets. The property located at 1850 Garden Terrace, Unit 7B, shall be transferred to the marital estate upon finalization of the family gifting agreement. My breath caught. They had listed my home in their legal documents as a foregone conclusion. I confronted her after the brunch. Liam continued, his voice low. She admitted it. All of it. The forged will, the complaints. She said it was what she deserved. He shook his head, a look of profound disillusionment on his face. I came here to tell you two things. First, I am having this clause legally struck from our prenup. And second, if this goes to court, I will testify on your behalf. I looked at him, at this man who had been a willing, if ignorant, participant in their scheme. There was no triumph in his defeat, only a shared, somber understanding. Why are you telling me this? I asked quietly. Because what they did was wrong, he said, meeting my gaze. And because I married into a family I don't recognize. I need to do one right thing. He stood to leave, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, Isla, I'm sorry. You deserved better. After he left, I stood by my window, watching the city lights begin to pepper the twilight. A single voicemail icon glowed on my phone. It was from my mother. I pressed play, and her voice, thick with a syrupy, forced emotion, filled the quiet room. Isla, darling. This has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Families fight. It's time to forgive and forget. Don't let this break us apart. Just come home. We can fix this. I listened to the message, to the familiar cadence of manipulation dressed as love. It was the same song she had been singing my entire life. But I no longer knew the words. I deleted the message without a reply. The next morning, I drove out of the city, toward the coast. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just needed the open road and the scent of salt in the air. I ended up at a small, windswept bluff overlooking the ocean, a place my grandmother had loved. I walked to the edge and sat on a weathered bench, the wind tugging at my hair. The ocean stretched out before me, vast and wild and indifferent. I pulled my grandmother's journal from my bag and opened it to the last page, where she had written a final note to me. Some people, my dear Isla, are gardeners. They nurture, they cultivate, they create beauty. Others are miners. They take, they extract, they see only value to be possessed. You cannot change a miner into a gardener. You can only protect your garden. A sense of profound, quiet peace settled over me. I had spent so long trying to be seen by people who were incapable of looking. I had mistaken their blindness for my own invisibility. I didn't burn the bridges. I just stopped crossing them to a place I was no longer welcome. And maybe to them, that was the ultimate betrayal. But to me, as I sat there with the ocean breeze on my face and my grandmother's words in my heart, it felt, for the very first time, like freedom.